Hi, listeners. Today we talked all things strategic growth. We talked Alan Overy, Shearman Sterling, Hogan levels, including recruiter conversations with corporate law firm executives. Keep listening and enjoy. Welcome, Gary and Dan, to the Future is Bright podcast. It's great to have you both on the show. If you both would just take a moment and do a quick intro, that would be great.
Gary, you start.
Well, thank you, Chris, and great to see you again, Dan. Gary Miles from Miles Partner Placement. Have a small boutique recruitment firm based on the West Coast, but operating nationally and somewhat internationally at the highest levels of partner placement, group movement, and occasional law firm combination, big and small.
My name is Dan Binstock. I'm a partner at Garrison. We are based in Washington, D.C. Company's got 10 people. We kind of think of it as major in Washington, D.C., and we handle strategic markets throughout the United States. I've been recruiting since 2004. Before that, I was an IP attorney and focused on partners, practice groups, and all of that fun stuff. So it's great to be here with you guys today. Looking forward to hanging out.
Great to have you both back on the show. Would love to just kind of wax eloquent on trends that we're seeing and topics that you and I, all of us, were discussing a moment ago. So big news: Alan and Overy, Shearman Sterling, they're marrying, coming together. Would love to get any kind of takes from you both, or particularly Gary, just on thoughts on what this might look like to the competitive landscape.
Well, I mean, it's the first time a Magic Circle firm has successfully, I think penetrated the U.S. market in mass, right, with a significant combination. I think there's going to be a lot of let's wait and see type approaches, and there usually are, particularly with large scale mergers. The interesting element of this, though, is that you look at both firms, and outside of New York and maybe Washington, D.C., like neither firm has really been successful growing around the landscape in any other major markets. I mean, Shearman Sterling has some presence in various places, but it's still very much a completely New York centered with DC focus and then some international capabilities. So I'm sure that this was something that was they really kicked around and looked at. So it'll be interesting to see what their real strategy is moving forward and how impactful they can be, in other markets. But anytime you see a combination of this scale, there's also the other side of it, right? Like how many partners and say, hey, you know what, this is a different landscape than what I had originally signed up for, and maybe I want to look at something else now because this isn't what I signed up for. So I think you could see some of that too, if I had to guess.
Yeah, and one thing you raised a really good point, Gary, about some difficulty in growing outside of DC and New York for some of the Magic Circle firms. I mean, A&O was a couple of years ago. They were in talks with O'Melveny. So this is not the first time that they've been. We think about Freshfields, Linklaters. Freshfields has been on more hiring spree a little bit more than Linklaters, but it's hard. I think some of the Magic Circle firms may not have anticipated some of the challenges in getting U.S. partners to buy into the global platform. I think there are benefits to certain practice areas, but across as a whole, it's not always the easiest sell, right, despite having a lot of positive elements. I think sometimes Magic Circle firms anticipate that what they're able to sell in their own countries will be replicated in the United States. And I think the one thing we've learned is it's not as easy as just, field of dreams, build it and they will come.
Agreed.
It seems that the last time this took place was the Hogan-Hartson Levels merger in your backyard, Dan. And I mean, Hogan Hartson was a very highly regarded firm in the DC market transactionally, I think. And then you have the finance shop of Lovells, and for all intentional purposes, it sounds like that was successful. Would you guys agree?
Yeah,
I'll let you go first on this. I've got I've got my own thoughts.
yeah. I mean, uh, you know, I think it depends how do you define success, and you talk to a lot of different people and you get a lot of different perspectives. I think overall many more things went right than went wrong. I think it worked. It made them a global powerhouse, and I think overall it was a success. Now there are pockets within the firm, within certain practice groups, within certain people that question whether the nature of the global platform is necessary, whether it creates more conflicts, whether they still miss the good old days of just being a Hogan and Hartson, where it was more of just a big DC firm. So they're all whenever you have a real game changing seismic move like that, there are always going to be some people who are unhappy with
Yeah.
that. But overall, on the whole, despite some speed bumps that happened understandably, I view the whole thing as being a successful move. But no one escapes a big merger unscathed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would, I'd echo that with Dan, and I think it's quite informative to look at the two side by side because Hogan was far more developed in terms of its reach, its brand in various markets outside of its home base than Shearman and Sterling, arguably than Shearman and Sterling currently is, at least domestically. And I think that that probably is so it was a better base from which a transatlantic union to take place. I think was had a better chance of having a greater impact domestically here as a whole. Now that being said, I always see the flip side, and although I think it's going to be really interesting to see, how beneficial the Stroock acquisition writ large, the components that they took on and how that plays out and how culturally that plays out because, it's going to be such a cultural shift from what those folks, have always been accustomed to. So I think Hogan Lovells is definitely one of the dynamic firms in the market now that bears watching. Just depends on which perspective you're going to be watching it from. But I think it's going to be really interesting in the next couple of years, and I still think we're a couple of years out from seeing the data of how successful
For sure.
metrics wise the merger, the first merger, the Lovells Hogan merger, was. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it usually takes like 5 to 10 years
Yeah.
to be able to assess the success.
Right.
So pivoting a little bit, Stroock. I mean, another one bites the dust. We have seen firms experience departures and can't find a suitor to keep them alive. Any takes from you gentlemen on this? And what do you anticipate in 2024, 2025 with either combinations and or failures?
Dan, go ahead.
Stroock is not a surprise. I mean, I will tell you a story that happened in I guess I can share it now, but I don't, it's not confidential. So I can share it. We were talking to someone in 2012 about Stroock, a partner, and this partner said, "Sure, we're happy to meet with you to talk about them." We're doing a search in the DC office. This partner said, "I want to talk to you not about joining Stroock." This was at lunch, but about Stroock merging with our firm because based on their unfunded pension plan, they're going to run into a lot of problems. May not be now, but this is going to come back to bite them. And if they want to talk about doing something, they should talk to our firm about a merger. this was back in like 2012 or
10
sometime around
years.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I never forgot that. And at the time, the firm obviously didn't want to do anything. But it just goes to show that the unfunded pension retirement plans, how that can be such a silent drain on a firm that's slow. There are other firms that have them, but I think they're so well capitalized that it's okay. But we saw this coming, or at least it's not surprising for 10 plus years in terms of what could have happened here.
Yeah. It's always partially unfortunate, right? When we see these institutional firms that have been, in practice for well over, Stroock was what, like 180 years old or something like that, like
140. Yeah.
40, so like long time.
Yeah.
Hell, they did the deal on the Brooklyn Bridge, but I mean, it's like Dan said, I think that there's one theme that usually runs through most firms' crashes, okay, when we're talking big and even small. And one thing that you can always look to is, does the firm have a succession plan for leadership? And does the firm have leadership that is forward thinking in terms of where they want to take the firm and grow it from the base of where it is, or is the firm leadership reacting to situations that the firm is constantly faced with in a competitive market, right? So, and I think there was kind of those threads running throughout, right, at Stroock. And I think it's a really potentially interesting acquisition for the folks at Hogan Lovells, because we all know Hogan Lovells for years had always tried to get a meaningful real estate transactional presence to back up its corporate real estate capabilities that they had built the market leading presence in, and they finally did it, right? Like, they've missed so many times in multiple markets, and they finally were able to get something substantive. So it's going to be really interesting how that plays out. But what I've found in my experience, and I've been involved in placing numerous partners that were at leadership level. I've placed former chairmen of firms. A lot of times, big or small, it gets down to how strategic was the succession plan, and how, and if they had one, how good was the firm at executing it, right? And
Yeah.
partners are only going to be patient so long with those elements of a firm's business model. So I think that was part of what we saw happen here.
Yeah, I don't think I think there a lot of older partners were in leadership roles for too long and didn't want to give up power, and it almost felt like people had to pull the power away.
Yeah.
And it's never a good thing. And things kind of started going downhill when, not downhill, but one of the partners, I forgot his name, went over to Proskauer in like 2016, and that was kind of there's been stuff. It's not a surprise.
Yeah.
But when firm, I think the lesson learned is that firms shouldn't wait till things on a scale of 1 to 10 are at an 8 until they're being reactive, like Gary's saying. When things get to like a 5 or a 6, in any situation, is when the rumbling starts. You almost have to be a little bit more paranoid about the rumbling to be proactive.
Yeah. Regrettable departures, as you guys are basically saying, people, and as well as kind of leadership and strategic planning, bringing up that fun topic, that if they do create a strategic plan, that they actually execute on it, and it's not incumbent leaders writing out the control for their heydays. There has to be some humility and some courage to keep the wheels on. Would love for you two to share a little bit of magic ball of, because I know you're dialoguing with firms, um, without mentioning any, but knowing or talking with groups. Do we have other Strooks out there to anticipate over the next couple of years, and or any other surprises, not surprises, but the trends that we should expect?
I think there's conversations going on all the time. I think I don't know how many quote unquote Strooks we have. I mean, I've heard a couple of different firm names in different market regions where, certain firms may be struggling financially or dealing with some of the issues we've already raised here. But I think you're going to continue to see merger conversations, and I think the one thing that was illustrated and immensely clear about the two, we're talking about two mergers that both probably went public with the fact that they were having conversations and probably in quite prematurely, if you would. But I think there was different responses both by those two firms and how they managed, and then the two partnership conversations or multiple partnership conversations in one case, how those processes were managed on both sides. And because I think very clearly, like, the Shearman, Allen Overy thing could have gotten out of control, right? Like,
Mhm.
one thing you have to commend those two firms on is it got leaked way early. I'm surmising than either leadership of either firm, but they came up with a plan, and they figured out how they were going to sell it internally and cross some high thresholds to get across the deal, the deal threshold, right? Whereas in the other situation where things became public early, there were multiple failed attempts, right? And so, and part of that probably had to do with some of the issues we raised, but also a lot of that tends to happen when there's certain institutional pride and things, and people, are pretty stuck in what they want or what they're willing to accept, and they can't get the whole enchilada across the finish line. And so I just think I think that's fascinating, like an analysis, a case study of those two kind of contemporary things that were going on at the same time. But I think what this is illustrative of, these conversations are going on all the time, and some are formal, some are informal. Firms are looking to grow. Mid-sized firms are looking to become national firms. National firms are looking to become more prominent. Everyone's looking to get, everyone in the AmLaw 100, 200 is hoping one day to get to a certain level where, in their minds and from their consultants' perspective, they get the substantive critical mass that allows them to thrive and capture a greater share of the client's wallets. So I don't see this slowing down in any regards.
Yeah, agreed.
You know,
One thing that I think there's a lack of firms accepting and being content with who they are, and sometimes confusing that with stagnation or
right.
if you're not growing, then you're falling behind. I think if everyone is trying to grow the same way, you all become the same, and you're not that different. And I think some firms their strategic plans are just, we're 60 people in this city. By 2025, we want to be 100 people. And they don't know how they want to get there, why they want to get there. They just write it down and they talk about, all right, well, these are some areas we want to either build on strength or fill out, areas that we don't have. But it's what it takes to be able to get good people that aren't already on the market and shopping around, adding them to a list of 5 or 6 firms. You really need to have like so much more of a thought through strategy that makes sense and is more than just, we want to, it's like when you're trying to lose weight. I can say I weigh 100 X. I'm 175. I want to weigh 155 by March of next year. What's the likelihood that I'm going to weigh 155? No, I've got to put in like, I got to exercise every day. Why do I want to exercise? Because I want to feel good. I want to be healthy for my kids. I want to be able to see them old. Like, you have to create all of these. It's kind of like losing weight, but in reverse. There need to be those reasons, and you need to be able to put up with all of the different obstacles, certain partners being threatened. We want to bring in this person, make them a co-head. Oh, that's going to be threatening to these partners over here. So the possible conflicts. So there's a lot of pain that comes with growth, and a lot of strategic plans I don't think anticipate building in or baking in what the pain points are going to be and how you're going to come over those pain points at the outset. And is everyone really willing to deal with the pain points that come with growth the same way the pain points that come with losing weight? That's a little bit of a strained metaphor, but kind of came up.
And if I can piggyback on what Dan's saying and just flip it to the candidate's perspective, right? The partner or group who's out there thinking about making a move. Maybe they've never really thought about making the move. They've been well treated. But there's certain things that are starting to get under their skin a little bit. I think Dan brings up a really cogent point that it's really important if you're going to be in a competitive landscape for top talent. And I consider that also a lot of times top talent that isn't looking, because most of the people you really, really want don't have this built-in situation, at their firm where they're thinking about, hey, I've got to leave, right? There may be some open-mindedness to the right specific compelling opportunity and the right, financial gain from that. But at the end of the day, a lot of those folks are assets and they're not necessarily looking to leave. And I think for firms that want to be strategic and impactful in their growth, really do need to figure out a way, how are they distinguishing themselves from the herd, in the marketplace? What is it about them, their infrastructure, their culture, their platform, how they internally do things that makes them different than firms XYZ, who, when you look at, just a hierarchical rankings like the AMLA or whatever, that would be considered their peer firms, right? And they're above peer firms and they're below peer firms. How do you distinguish yourself? And they try to, firms put a lot of thought in that with respect to how they do it for clients, but they don't necessarily always put a lot of thought of how they're going to do it for potential lateral recruiting. And I think a lot of that also comes from the over preponderance of certain institutional elements of institutional pride, where firms come to the recruiting game thinking people should want to join us because we're us.
Yeah.
It doesn't typically always work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good point, Gary. And if I could piggyback on what you're saying, it's sort of like, I sometimes feel bad for firms when we say, well, what makes you different than your competitors? And we're talking to people who've been at one firm their whole career. It's
Right.
kind of like someone who's lived in one house and there's 7 other houses on the block for sale. And you say, well, what makes this house different than the other houses for sale? And they're like, I don't know. Our house is beautiful. We got, we just redid the kitchen, new carpeting. We built on, new pool, all this stuff. But unless they know what's going on around the neighborhood, they don't really know. You know what? No other firm or no other house has what we've got in terms of this, 3rd floor level, basement walkout, whatever it is. So that's where we as recruiters come in and say, here's what else is going on in the neighborhood. And our job is to say, here's how you can distinguish yourself, or let's work with you to pull out ways to distinguish yourself from the other houses for sale in the neighborhood. Because right now, we know you love your house and think you're going to get top dollar, but it's a lot like the 4 other houses on your same block. And that's what we try to do as recruiters. People like Gary, Chris, all of us are trying to pull out what makes it. And sometimes it takes a lot of discussion. We got to dig deep beyond the surface of just, we're doing great. Numbers are up 7%. in a down year. Like, and we got to sometimes really, really dig into something. And there can be one sentence that someone will say passively in a conversation. We'll be, whoa, go back to that. We're going to build it around this because this is different and this resonates. And you know it when you hear it. You're like, all right, that's it.
Yeah.
And Chris, not to jump, but I have to just jump in on what Dan just said because that just sparked a memory, a good memory. One of the bigger to small acquisitions that I did, I remember that the lead partner of the smaller firm that eventually got acquired, going on the website after I told them about this firm client of mine that wanted to be in a certain location and how I really thought that this was a really great fit and this could offer them something about different from anything else they've ever been approached with. And I remember having a conversation, setting up the first meeting, and the lead partner saying, I went on the website and I loved it. And then after the first meeting, hearing back from the firm that eventually acquired, saying that the lead partner said, I don't know where this call is going to go, but this statement on your website, even if this doesn't go anywhere, can I just take it and put it and use it for our firm? It captures who we are exactly, right? And so Dan is so right. Like, you never know what that slogan or statement or principle that gets pulled out, if it's emphasized the right way in the right story context by a talented, experienced recruiter, you can never measure the impact of that. You know what I mean?
Let me jump in and just share a couple of things. I want to compliment what you guys are saying and also probably bring this a little bit more to a close, being sensitive to time. So I had a law firm managing partner friend of mine I've done lots of business with recommend a book to me, and it is a Harvard professor that wrote a book called Different: Escaping the Competitive Herd. And differentiation is the plague right now that's not happening in big law. Everybody smells, tastes, and looks the same, except for the few that truly differentiate. And then they do it based on either practice, they do it based on location or industry, or they do it based on benchmarks, which is high, like sophisticated types of work or certain types of client base, or you could even distinguish among chamber rankings, or like the AmLaw rankings is another form of differentiation to some degree. But law firm management needs to strategically be sober about where they are and who they are, and to truly understand who their competitors are in comparison, because they're either attaining the talent that they want or they're losing out on talent to their competitors, or like a Stroock, they're dealing with regrettable departures because they're not executing on what they should be for various reasons. And so law firms have this outrageous opportunity right now to truly create their own brand in understanding the strengths in their practice areas, a sober understanding of what really is profitable inside of their firms and where there is truly growth, and who they are and who they're not. And that is what we as recruiters really want to grab a hold of and focus in on what we can truly sell and go after. And so I think you gentlemen are also saying that.
Yeah, I think as recruiters, we should be doing more than just saying, tell us what makes you different than the other firms. We should be pulling that out of them. And those are the conversations that I know you all like and have fun with, and where we geek out on those kind of, real detailed conversations. And we get excited when we hear things that are different, unique, and don't all sound the same.
What's funny though is, it's great that we can do that and we get to do that if we're good recruiters, but our clients should know that. Our clients should know exactly how to sell, because at the same time, we can bring an amazing group to them, sell the client, sell the group to the client, but it's the client that's got to carry that ball, and they have to still follow through on the transaction. And so whether we see it, they've got to know it, and they also have to communicate that too. And I think I like working with clients who know who they are, and
Right.
you can strategically help them grow versus convince them otherwise. But
And the firms that will say, we don't want to see anyone in this practice area, even if you've got, everyone will say, well, we'll always look at some, but I have more respect for the firms that if we come to them with a, $10, $20 million practice, and they're so sorry, this just is not in our growth plan right now. I have so much more respect for those firms than the ones that just will say, we'll pretty much look at
Anything.
anything.
Yeah.
Yep. Gentlemen, there's a lot we could talk about today, and I'm hoping we get to do this more often. But thank you both for your years, if I may say, decades of experience, and to our next time gathering. Thank you both.
Yeah, I'll just say I really appreciate this, and I always go to whenever I got a question that I don't understand or I'm stumped or something. Gary's always my first call, and I'm always incredibly impressed with Gary, just how much you know. You're like an encyclopedia on the market and what to do in situations. So any chance I get to hang out with Gary is
It's a treat.
awesome in my book.
Both of you gentlemen are too kind. And Dan, I always call Dan when I have a head scratcher. Chris, as you know, I was asking you about some issues that I've seen that I haven't seen in my career heretofore. So it's great connecting, really folks that are passionate about this at the highest levels. And really, Chris, thank you for what you do on this front, because I do think, and we didn't get to it today, but I think in future conversations, the opportunity to bring, experiences and best practices, to the community, both on the law firm side, the recruiting agency side. I know, Chris, you do a bunch of in-house stuff and have always done a bunch of in-house stuff, most recently anyway. So like all the different communities that are involved in recruiting within the legal sector, I think this is a much needed service to get the best, recruiters and the folks who have the most experience and that can share ideas, thoughts, and hopefully rub off and push our industry forward in terms of best practices. That's always something that I love taking part in, especially with you two guys, because you're really good at it.
Yeah, and Chris, you've got an your business sense and seeing, sometimes people who didn't grow up in a law firm have a real advantage because they bring a business side to things that you bring that is super refreshing and current. And I think really that's why so many people like working with you at the high levels of institutions. So thank you for what you're doing as well, Chris.
Thank you both. I appreciate the kind words. It's always fun to have you both on the show. We'll do this again soon. Have a great day.
All right, thanks everyone.
Take care. Happy Thanksgiving to both of you.